reading is from Rays of the One Light by Swami Kriyananda. Who are true Christians? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Jesus Christ said in chapter 10 of the Gospel of St. John, "All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them." Many Christians, not surprisingly, quote this saying in condemnation of other spiritual teachers, not only the Old Testament prophets, but also Buddha, Krishna, and others who lived before Jesus, as well as, by inference, any who came after him. Yet Jesus himself said in St. Matthew chapter 5, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill." Nowhere do we find Jesus condemning or even gently criticizing other spiritual masters. His criticisms were reserved for worldly attitudes and for those hypocritical Pharisees who had allowed religion to become, for them, a pretense. Paramahansa Yogananda explained that the expression, "all that ever came before me," referred to those spiritual teachers who placed their egos and their self-importance ahead of the Christ consciousness, in the sense of drawing people's devotion to themselves and not offering it where it alone truly belongs, to God. Yogananda himself was very firm in this regard. For example, he never spoke of anyone as his disciple. Instead, he always insisted, "They are God's disciples. God is the Guru, not I." Ego is a way station on the soul's journey toward enlightenment. The soul is first trapped in lower bodily forms. Slowly it evolves to the human level, at which point self-consciousness appears. Only in human form can self-consciousness transcend material form altogether, including the lower identity of ego consciousness, and discover the true divine self within. Self-consciousness manifested as ego is an incentive to deliberate self-development. Later in this process of development, however, the ego becomes an obstruction. Inevitably, new spiritual aspirants do not emerge effortlessly from the vortex of ego consciousness. Desire must be offered up resolutely and ever more wholeheartedly on the altar of infinity. It is a gradual process, and few, even among those who seek to help others, are free of ego. If, however, their motive in teaching is not to serve, but to be served, they deserve a severe reprimand, as Jesus gave them. For their direction of development is no longer upward, but downward. In the name of giving up desires, they are creating new ones. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita in the 3rd chapter, "Desire obscures even the wisdom of the wise. Their relentless foe it is, a flame never quenched. Intellect, mind, and senses, these combined are referred to as the seat of desire. Desire, through them, deludes and eclipses the discrimination of the embodied soul. O Arjuna, discipline your senses, and having done so, work to destroy desire, annihilator of wisdom and of self-realization. Give God credit for everything you do. See him as the true doer. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind."
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's been a while. I realized. I thought it was pretty cosmic that the reading today, who were true Christians, and the point of the reading that we all just heard about ego transcendence, fit in so beautifully with the eclipse that happened earlier this week, as my husband pointed out in his opening prayer. Because Yogananda talked about the moon representing the ego, and the sun representing our soul, the light of our soul. And when the ego covers the moon, even in broad daylight, covers the sun, we get instant darkness. And this is the dynamic, this is the constant tension that's going on that inner battlefield between ego and soul. Who are true Christians? I have a little bit of a difficult time with that phrase because I wasn't born a Christian, and it makes it sound like a particular religion. He's talking about who are truly spiritual, who are truly lovers of God, seeking God. And of course, it's those that we're all in ego, that's why we're on this plane, right? But it's those who are consciously trying to reach out and attune and seek to the divine within, to that light within, have that inner life and transcend ego. And that takes effort and self-discipline and work. It takes the ability to be still and meditate and introspect and reflect and be able to see where we are little self-motivated and where we are in attunement with a greater reality that touches all, that is cosmic, that is unifying. When a disciple of Yogananda, whose teachings we practice here, asked him, "Sir, when I pray and meditate, should I pray to you or Divine Mother?" He said instantly, Divine Mother. Just like in the reading this morning, you are God's disciples. And that wasn't just an affirmation for him, because he was already out of ego. But it's so that we don't get preoccupied with the form only. There's a story that Swami Kriyananda, Yogananda's disciple and Ananda's founder, shared when he visited Swami Ramiya in India. And Yogananda had talked about this great saint in India, Swami Ramiya, that he had visited in 1935 when he went back to India. And he said, if I had stayed just a half hour longer, I would not have been able to go back to America. I would have just wanted to walk the Ganges and bliss and ecstasy with him for eternity. And so Kriyananda was able to visit him on one of his journeys while he was still in the body. And Swami Ramiya told him the story that some of you know about Namdev. There was a great saint who lived in a village in India named Namdev. And Namdev was a lover of Krishna. And he used to go to the temple in his village and pray and meditate for Krishna to come to him. And Krishna would come to him in vision often. And he became very uplifted, so full of Krishna in that time that other villagers would come when he was in the temple just to sit around him and be at his feet and try to share that experience with him somehow. There was another great soul, great saint in that village, and he was a potter by profession. And so one day there was a great festival, a spiritual festival in the temple, and all the villagers came, the disciples of Namdev and of the potter and many others. And somehow the potter had this strange inspiration. He went around, you know how potters check if pots have a crack in them, and he raps at them. And if they make a certain sound, it means they've got a little crack in them. And so he went around and knocked on people, all the people that were present. And, they thought it was a little bit weird, getting slapped around by this guy, but they knew he was a great soul, and they must have a reason, so they took it in stride. But when he got to Namdev and he went like that, Namdev was outraged. He said, "How dare you do that to me?" He figured he was his spiritual equal, and the potter said, "I think I detect a crack in this pot." And everybody roared with laughter. Well, poor Namdev was so embarrassed and insulted. He went off and he went and prayed to Krishna, "How can you do this? How could you let that happen? Have me be so humiliated?" And Krishna said, "What could I do? There is a crack in this pot." And Namdev says, "Lord, I want only thee. Please show me the way to perfection." And so Krishna said, "Well, for that you're going to need a guru." Namdev says, "I have you. Why do I need a guru?" And Krishna said, "I can inspire you, I can teach you, but for your spiritual freedom, you need a guru, because that's my divine law." And so he told Namdev who his guru was in a distant village and the name of the village to go find him. So Namdev took off immediately, gets to the village. There's a temple there, but he's a ways off from it, and he starts asking people about this man. And they said, "You don't want to meet that lunatic," and he thought, uh-oh. And then one of them said, "Well, he usually hangs out in the temple. You'll find him there." So he went over to the temple, went inside, and there was this old, disheveled man lying on the floor, all sort of sprawled out. And he thought, "Oh no, is this my guru? What are you doing to me, Lord?" And just as he was about to say something, he noticed that this man had his feet on a Shiva lingam, which is a sacred, precious symbol in India. And he just scolded him, said, "Move your feet, that's desecrating the Shiva lingam." And the old man said, "Well, I'm so old, I have a difficult time moving my body. Would you be willing to move my feet to a place where there isn't a lingam?" And so Namdev went over gladly, and moved the man's feet. And just before he put him down, a lingam appeared underneath them. And then he did it again, and the same thing happened. And again, he did it 4 times. And each time, a lingam appeared where the feet were. And then Namdev just bowed down to this man. He said, "Gurudeva, I'm so sorry. I understand what you're trying to show me." And the Guru said, "Very well." He said, "When you realize the divine light within you, then you see it everywhere, in everyone. God is everywhere." And he touched him on the chest, and Namdev went into ecstasy, and for several weeks he wandered the countryside in a state of bliss. And then he happened by his old village, and he went into the temple, and he sat to meditate and pray to Lord Krishna. And Lord Krishna said to him, "Namdev, where have you been? You used to come in here every single day to commune with me." And Namdev just smiled, and he said, "Lord, you're playing with me. I see you everywhere, and I've been with you everywhere." And Krishna just smiled. He said, "Now there's no more crack in this pot." Well, it's sort of a long story, but it's very pertinent to this topic today, because we're trying to find the cracks in our pot, the crack in our pot. And then we're trying to attune ourselves to God, to the divine that is within us. It's only reflected outside of us because it is within us, but we can see it when we touch it within us. You know, Swami Kriyananda at Ananda, you know, through the years, he always showed equal respect for everyone. He always carried himself in a very dignified, and it wasn't affected, it was just natural. He could be very warm, and you always felt his complete attention. But it was the same to everyone. He didn't distinguish whether it was race or creed or nationality or gender or anything else. He was just always the same. I remember he could lecture in 7 languages. And we had the great blessing sometimes to be with him in different countries when he was lecturing in different languages. And I could always understand him because he spoke Swami. You know, I didn't speak the language, but I knew what he was talking about because I could just, I don't know, somehow I could understand it because he was always the same. Because we are always the same, and we are all the same. There are no distinctions because they're only on the outside. But we take on this persona. I remember the man who later turned out to be Swami's secretary. Back when he first came to Ananda in the early 80s, his name was Alan then. It's Lakshman now. But I met him and I learned a little about him, and he had these very thick glasses and he just looked like a geek, you know, and computers were just coming in that time. And so, of course, he told me he did, you know, program software and stuff. And so I introduced him to Kriyananda. I said, Swami, this is Alan, and he works with computers. And Swami just chuckled, and he said, well, you didn't have to say that. It's obvious, you know. Because we just take on this persona, but we are not that. You know, just because we're a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer or whatever we may be. I remember when I got into the coordinating the publishing for Ananda, I knew nothing about it. And there was this stigma about, you know, the professional publisher. Well, when I got to know them, they were just people, just like me. And they were just as unsure about certain things and trying other things. Some were more egotistical about it than others, and then they'd mess up, you know. But they were just people. And I wanted to learn how it worked so that I could figure out how to do God's work around it, you know, where I was going to need to work around it in order to get done what we needed to get done. Through the years when Riemann and I had to do legal things for Ananda, we had to sit there with our lawyers and say, no, we're not doing it that way. What about this? And they would just never have thought about it in those ways, and they'd help us figure out a way to do it God's way. You know, I was said in my email for this week, wouldn't it be great if we could view the whole world as souls, people as souls, rather than all of these distinctions, these ego distinctions that we make. God has a completely different view of our reality than we do because we're so stuck in the physical. Swami also taught us well, he taught me the lesson, and I think a few of us who were present. I remember in the early 70s, he taught us not to... See, we flip this thing around. There can be a great soul like a Yogananda or a Christ or Krishna, and we cover them up through the filter of our limited understanding to be like us. And so I went with a few friends to see the movie Brother Sun, Sister Moon in the early 70s when I was living at Ananda. It was a Zeffirelli version of St. Francis's life. And I fell in love with it. And all my friends did too, and we spoke to Kriyananda about it, all excited. And he went to see it with us, and he walked out partway through. I said, "That's not Francis. He wasn't a flower child." He didn't go tiptoeing through the meadow, with flowers and all sort of sentimental. He said he was a great man of God. He had power. He had will. He had joy that puts the world on fire. He didn't, sort of have this sentimental image that we put through our filter because that's how we still relate. Yogananda would not allow people to become overly personal with his personality. That's why he kept redirecting them to God. People used to ask Swami Kriyananda, "Can you tell us more stories about your time with Yogananda?" And he said, I can't think of stories just for the sake of stories. He said, I can only think of stories with Yogananda when I'm trying to share a spiritual point, and it happens to illustrate that point. Otherwise, they don't come to me because they're not, on that level. They're not on the personal level. And so this who is truly spiritual thing, it's the great ones. And where, if there's still ego in there, we have to sort of discern what that is, because we may not have a completely free soul in front of us, but they may be far more advanced spiritually than we are. Always discerning. Swami Kriyananda used to say, never put me on a pedestal. I'm not yet free. It's not fair to you, it's not fair to me. We're just doing our best together. But you could see when he would do things and say things that were in complete harmony with Yogananda. And so learn great things from it. But we have to learn that discernment, each and every one of us, for ourselves. I wanted to close just with a little personal thing that I've shared with some of you. Years ago, I had an eye surgery. And they had to take something off the cornea of my eye. And they were going to numb the eye, but I had to be awake to do it because I had to be able to move my eye for them on instruction. And I was a little bit wigged out at the thought of a knife coming, directly at my pupil and what that was going to be like. And so I asked if I could listen to something while they're doing it. So if I had an earbud in one ear, then I could hear them with the other ear. And I decided that morning to put on a talk of Yogananda's voice. Only a handful exist, but I had one and I was listening to it. And right at the point when that knife was coming at my eye, Yogananda was saying in his talk, don't keep thinking, I. He said, think God. That's it.
I'd like to read from from Whispers from Eternity by Paramahansa Yogananda, this selection. It's entitled Demand for Control of the Unruly Senses. O Spirit, let me not feed my insatiable sense cravings with further wrong deeds. Teach me to discipline myself, that I think always in terms of my true happiness. If my senses become unruly, teach me to govern my will not to cooperate with them and their desires, to feed them only wholesome acts. As electricity can either illuminate or destroy a building, so human power can either glorify or devastate a life. Let me learn then to govern wisely the finite forces thou hast entrusted to me, that each of them with this twofold potency be directed only toward the good. Let the greedy flames of all desires consume their own dross not by self-indulgence, but by self-offering into the white heat of thy wisdom. Teach me, O Spirit, to cooperate with thy will, to perform every duty harmoniously, and to sing the one little song thou hast given me to sing, until all my unruly senses learn to join happily in full harmony with thy cosmic plan. Let the rivulets of my sense cravings be transmuted into the one mighty river of soul craving. And, O Spirit, spare not thy rod of discipline, if ever I stray again toward the senses and away from my true path of craving for thee. We'd like now